Child abuse and child neglect are topics we rarely talk about. However, on today's episode of the Wealthy Podcast, my guest, Ginny Becker, the Executive Director of the Child and Youth Advocacy Center here in Kelowna, is the best person to talk about these sensitive subjects. Ginny takes us on a journey of how innovation and system change and leadership and vision and hard work can help us navigate some of the most difficult situations that we as a community are facing when it comes to our children. You're going to want to listen. Today, I'm welcoming a good friend of the KGH Foundation to the podcast, Ginny Becker. She is the Executive Director of the Child and Youth Advocacy Center here in Kelowna, where she leads efforts to support children impacted by abuse and neglect. This role sees her collaborating with law enforcement, healthcare providers, and social services to support children facing what could only be characterized as heartbreaking situations. Ginny is the 2023 recipient of RBC's Canadian Women Entrepreneur Award for Social Change in our region. And most recently, very recently, the CYAC was awarded the 2024 Kelowna Chamber of Commerce Award for Not-for-Profit Excellence. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So when I was digging into Ginny's bio and experience, I noticed 3 key themes that I'm really excited to talk to her about today. First, of course, is the work at CYAC. And the ways in which this organization has structured their services to truly meet the needs of the kiddos that you're supporting. Second is Ginny's leadership in the area of social change, which is compelling for me because we share that, not just leadership, but actually a passion for making a difference in the world. So I'm curious what drives this in you, Ginny, and what is it about trying to solve complex social problems that are seemingly unsolvable that draw you to them? And finally, I'm actually inspired by Ginny's leadership because she's using her superpowers for good and is the kind of influencer who's truly making a real difference. It's like my passion is also for long intros. So
we like a long intro. That's good.
So we have lots to talk about, and let's get at it. Welcome, Ginny.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to have you. So we have a bit of an opening tradition on the Wealthy Podcast because the theme that knits all of us together that are having these conversations is basically we have a passion for establishing empowering health in our communities. And I know certainly your work is driven by that desire to really help some of our community's most vulnerable populations thrive. But what got you there? Was there sort of tell me about little Ginny, and where did you first start to develop this desire to participate in endeavors around health and healthcare?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if I was ever specifically pursuing healthcare. I don't even know if I saw it as healthcare working down the path, but my journey to get to where I am has been one of those kind of really windy, meandering paths. I wasn't one of those people who went to school and knew exactly what I wanted to be. I think like a lot of people, there's a couple periods where I thought I knew exactly what I wanted to be, and then I realized maybe not. Maybe that's not the path. Which is interesting, kind of literally having these conversations with teenagers right now about you don't have to know the answers. You just have to know kind of what drives you and then keep following the path that unfolds. But for me, little Ginny was always the kid in class that, got the statement on the report card. Ginny is really great at all these things, but Ginny talks too much, constantly. And so I think always from a young age, knowing I wanted to use my voice, even though it was one of those things that got me a little bit in trouble at school for talking too much and being too chatty. But voice is an important thing. So I think as my career unfolded, I went to university, and again, without a clear direction, but wanted to go and get that post-secondary. And then I came back to Kelowna and really just wanted to work in sort of locally driven initiatives. And I started in the wine industry, and then I moved into event planning. I was in all these kind of different spaces, but all the way along, always kind of pursuing a leadership role. I was always somebody who wanted to guide next steps and figure out how it goes. But you have to earn your right to be in that space. And then I had my kids, and I think having kids was a real catalyst for realizing that I wanted to do just more to be impactful. So I was working in a great role. And I literally left work one day and I was driving home. I know exactly where I was. I had just left the roundabout on Burns Road and I was driving down the long straight stretch with the big speed bumps. You know the ones? Because if you don't know them, your car's in trouble.
You will soon find out.
You will soon find out. So I literally was driving home that day and I just had this big epiphany of, I don't want to work anymore just for the corporate infrastructure. I knew that I needed to do something different and that I wanted to do more than volunteer on occasion, which is a beautiful thing to do. But if I was going to leave my kids at home, I needed to be doing something that mattered when I walked in the door at work. And I went home and told my husband, I'm like, I think I need to quit my job. I think I need to do something different. And he was super supportive. I was like, do what you need to do. And I gave my notice the next day without being really clear about what or where I would go next. And I literally ended up just searching the Castanet ads on not-for-profit and just figuring out, like, I need to go work somewhere that gives back.
Yeah.
And initially I landed in a very complex organization that didn't end up being my dream come true. But I was there long enough to realize what it felt like to go home with more than a paycheck at the end of the day, that going home with that sort of knowledge that you could make a difference, that, you could use your own gifts for good. Basically.
Yeah.
So that didn't work out. And then I went to another role. I actually worked with BC Gaming for a little bit, feeling like I would feel really connected to the way they give back, because they do. Like there's a lot of giving through that organization, but I felt pretty detached from it. I wasn't close enough to it. And then received the call one day from an old friend who was working towards building this child advocacy center, and asked if I'd come and collaborate and work on it. And I actually originally said no, because I had the job everyone was supposed to want, government job, pension benefits, all those things. But and then I was, I had that conversation for a few weeks, and I was actually in the car with my then 9-year-old, and I was kind of deep in thought. She was trying to talk to me and I was kind of distracted, and she's like, "What are you thinking about, Mom?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking about this big decision I have to make. I have this great job that sort of everybody's supposed to check all the boxes. And then I've been offered this other job that is maybe scarier and it's not certain." Yeah. But it would be doing something really meaningful for kids. And my 9-year-old said, "Well, Mommy, that does not sound like a difficult choice at all," as it goes.
I love that.
Yeah. So I said yes. And here we are today. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, but I don't know, coming back to the original question, if I ever thought about it as healthcare.
Right.
I really thought about it as community, like just how do you make a difference in community? But I think it's also interconnected, that if you're doing one, you're naturally impacting the other.
And actually, we're going to come back to that theme at the end of our conversation, because I'm going to ask you a question about how your perspective on healthcare or health has changed over the years, because I know that that's something that's certainly been an inquiry for me, and then being a part of the KGH Foundation, and then just as you said, the interconnectedness of all of these different initiatives and projects and not-for-profits and even for-profits, the intersection all has an impact, right, on our health and well-being as people and also as community. So we'll park that one, and we're going to come back to that.
On the parking lot?
Yeah, in the parking lot. So I know that, and I love that you share about having that, I call it my coming to Jesus moment, where after I had my kids, I had that job too. I was working for the Sun in the Province. It was a union job. It was like the one that everybody, remember the Sun in the Province? Like, oh yeah, newspapers.
Yeah, remember that.
I know. Yeah, but like it was literally after I had kids, and I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate to that. It's like you all of a sudden become aware that your time is valuable, and that if you're going to choose to pursue a career, and maybe at the there's always an opportunity cost not being home with your kids, then you want to be doing something that like
That fills your bucket a little bit.
That has an impact for you, whatever. And that might be making widgets. But for me, I had the same this awareness, like I want to do something different.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage to kind of chase that down and figure out like, what is that next step? And not everybody can, and that's fair. But if you can find your ways, I always tell everybody, like, everybody can give back in some way. There's always a way, whether it's with 5 minutes of time or a specific set of skills, or, for some people it's with wealth, whatever it looks like. If we all did that one little tiny thing that is in our power to do, it certainly has significant opportunity to impact community and
you
people.
Mentioned it too. It's like tapping into like your superpowers.
Yeah.
Like, what are you good at? Right. And
so that's the funniest. Sorry, I'm just laughing because I remember sitting down at that computer the first time to look at not-for-profit jobs. And I was like, what am I? Yeah. I had this moment of, because I wasn't someone who had this like, I'm a this or I'm a that. Yeah. I was like, well, I'm good at that. And I really like doing that. But I'm like, what am I? Because I'd worked in sales and marketing and business development, but I was like, it wasn't clearly like I'm looking for that job.
Right.
I was just looking for something that spoke to me. And I found it initially. And like I say, and then it just kind of created a next step building
the trajectory
block.
Of your life changed. Yeah, totally. And you, I mean, you've definitely found your place.
Yeah, I love my place right now.
At the CYAC, for sure. So let's talk about that. Like,
sure.
Tell me, you sort of outlined how your path to becoming executive director, but like, tell me about like the mission and the work that CYAC is really hoping to, like, where are you hoping to have an impact, and what is the mission that you're on?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I took the role, initially I took the role to help lead the sort of capital phase of it. To support,
so like the fundraising.
Yeah, stakeholder management, the partnership model, fundraising, community storytelling, like just helping to bring the story to life in our community. And that was kind of my only plan. My plan after that was to kind of move on and do the next thing. But what I realized at the end of that phase was that all we had built was a stage, a vessel. It was a space. But the really complex job of building system change and an organization that could thrive and be sustainable in the community was really at its infancy. And that was the piece I got really excited about, was stepping in to help really take this thing from a vessel to a solution, hopefully. So, and it's an extremely complex model. It's fundamentally a partnership of organizations that work together to reduce system harm in the space of child abuse and neglect. Historically, when you look into communities, and traditionally even still today, when you look into communities that don't have CYACs, which are many, it's a very fractured approach driven by large agencies.
Right.
It's when a child discloses abuse, it triggers healthcare, it triggers policing, it triggers child protection, it triggers all these other pieces. But it's traditionally been a very fractured and siloed system where, these really vulnerable children and families would have to kind of self-navigate this complex labyrinth of systems and care. And that's only if you know where to look, which I think is easily relatable to healthcare. If anyone's ever been in the circumstance of, you tell this person that story and then you get referred to that person and you start over and use the next person. Similar, but then make it a really vulnerable child without the skills and resources of many adults who can figure that navigation piece out. So CYACs are really designed to kind of flip that system around, so that instead of having these large agencies looking at a child who's vulnerable saying, what do I need from this kiddo to do my work? It's really about putting kids at the center and having everyone ask the question, what can I contribute to this child's healing journey? So we have, our specific space, and not every CYAC is the same, but for us, we're a fully co-located embedded partnership. So we have the facility in the center of town, which was purpose-built for these kiddos. And within it, we have a fully embedded police unit. We have fully embedded social work and child protection, victim services through our partners with EFRI. We've built our own mental health care solution, which I could talk about all day. It's one of the things I'm most proud of what we're doing right now. And we have the first clinic of its kind in Canada, really dedicated to these vulnerable kids and these experiences. So it's really everyday work of driving this vision of change and trying to motivate and inspire these really big traditional systems think differently and to, I spent a lot of time sitting across from people in positions far more powerful than mine to kind of ask that question of, okay, well, are we doing it that way because like it's legally the only way we can do it? Or are we doing it that way because we're used to doing it that way? And can we ask different questions today? Can we look at it differently? And that's the system change piece that gets really exciting is diving into, but what if? What if we did it a little bit differently? And our clinic is a great example of that, and our partnership with Interior Health to bring that to life. It took a long time, but we had so many champions along the way that really helped us kind of drive this change to where we are today, which is really exciting.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the goals that we share as organizations is that we're constantly in that inquiry as well. It's like, okay, we know like we're so used to talking about everything that's wrong with the system. Like what happens if we flip the question and be like, okay, what could be right about it?
Yeah.
How can we reframe this? And even just, and I say simple because you can articulate in a sentence, but I know it's not simple, is like reframing all of the services around with the child at the center. Like you said, what can we get from the kiddo in order to do our job? Which I get that, right? Like law enforcement has systems and processes that have been put in place so that they can do the job they need to do in order to kind of advance their objectives, right? But sometimes it can feel a little difficult, let's just say, if you're at the center of that. So I think that to your credit, one of the biggest shifts is that CYAC puts the child at the center.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's really the goal. And it sounds obvious.
Yeah.
But it's hard when you're not in these places. The geographical and informational silos that have existed for years in these spaces are problematic. That's what creates these gaps that vulnerable people fall through.
Totally.
And when you can put, for us, when you put us in that space of holding up the idea that we can be the glue that binds and prevent those cracks and gaps in the systems from opening up, but instead having that sort of bird's eye view lens of what is this child's experience going to look like, then we can prevent a lot of really complex and difficult things from happening.
And I love that obviously you've had some success when you ask those questions to your partners, like, are we just doing this because this is what we do? Or is there another way? Can we explore this from another perspective?
And the most basic evidence of our community partners' willingness to change is that they're there.
Yeah.
That is a change in and of itself. You think about the difference of a child walking. We have a beautiful police station. It's still a police station. The criminal justice system is built for the criminal side of justice. These institutions are meant to look intimidating and larger than life because it's really creating that safety piece, right? But it doesn't always work for victims. And so if you think of a small child walking past the big gates and the police cars and uniforms and guns and, walking through a lobby where there's a lot of loud noise and, things happening that are really complex, versus walking into a child-centric location where plainclothes police officers are waiting for them. Like the very fact that they're there is the evidence of their willingness to change and come alongside to figure out how do we do this differently for these vulnerable kiddos. And we're incredibly proud of the work that we've been able to achieve through that space and making sure that kids are always held at that centerpiece.
It's a beautiful space. And I was lucky enough, you took me on a little tour a couple of weeks ago. It's really beautiful. And the energy is definitely different.
Yeah.
And you can feel that right when you walk in the door. So congratulations on really designing a very, very thoughtful space that integrates so wholly with the mission that you guys are on.
Yeah. And that's everyday work too, it's one thing to have the space and another to build teams of people that are committed to the sort of ideology of the space.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hardest part of the job is, with these big agencies, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of changing faces at the leadership levels, frontline levels. So it's sort of a constant pursuit of keeping the vision at the center of it and making sure that everybody is aligned and working towards the same outcome. So it's complicated, but it's very worth it.
Yeah, for sure. I think I would really love for you to share. This is a subject that I was really proud of you and your organization, I think it was either last year or the year before, you did a radio campaign that was quite unapologetic about the mission that you're on and the peril that these kiddos are facing and the need to really do things differently. And it was a bit surprising because I think child abuse is something that we talk about, but we don't.
It's a difficult conversation.
It is. And I kind of want to go there because I know you're the best person to talk about this stuff with. Can you share a little bit about what your kiddos are experiencing, like the kiddos that come to you?
Yeah, to begin with, I reflect on that campaign that you're talking about, and it's funny how it didn't even occur to me that was a question. Like our partners at Bell were amazing about that as well, because they had offered to partner with us on some time and energy, and I said, well, I'm not even that interested in a call to action around fundraising in this moment. What I want to do is help our community start having this conversation. Child abuse is something that is far more prolific than people want to acknowledge. And I think the work of organizations, and this is a weird, stay with me for a second because I'm going to make a weird comparison, but I often look at the extraordinary job that the SPCA has done about helping us acknowledge that abuse of animals happens and that it's not okay and that we have to do something about it. But in the space of child abuse, people have kind of really steered away from using the real words and the real impact of what that means in our community. And I remember coming into this job in the very beginning, I think it was like day 5, saying, we have to be real about this. We have to follow the lead of organizations like that who are having difficult conversation and be bold enough to call it what it is. And if you can talk about child abuse and not feel uncomfortable, then that's a problem. So we do have to sit in the discomfort of this conversation and acknowledge that it's happening, and it's happening everywhere. This is not a subject matter that discriminates by any matter. It lives everywhere, and we have to be able to have the conversation. And the kiddos that come to us have this really tragic common denominator for every child that walks through our space. They've experienced some form of abuse. And, we work in all of the definitions of abuse: sexual and physical violence, neglect, exposure to familial and intimate partner violence, online exploitation, most recently growing numbers in human trafficking. There's
which is
yeah, it's a mind bender.
You think that's just a thing in the movies.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we're trying to demystify, that, there are, that people think of trafficking and they go right to Liam Neeson and the movie Taken. And that is not inaccurate around international human trafficking. But we're trying to help people understand what domestic trafficking looks like, because these are Canadian children being trafficked across Canada. And we have to get really real about that conversation and helping people to understand how to watch for it and be part of a solution. So yeah, here's the tough part about our work and the content that we work in every day, is that we don't get to change what happened to these kids that walk through the door, but we have this really powerful opportunity to change what comes next for them. And when you think about, so many of the social issues that we're faced with right now, homelessness and addictions and, youth suicides, violence, like all these things that we're talking about, mental health, all of it. There's this really complex common denominator in childhood trauma. And if we can do better at that phase, then we help to eliminate and reduce some of these future harms as well. And that's, so we work in this space of dealing with, people ask me every day, like, how do you do this work? And it is really heavy work. It's heavy. But we counter that also with working in the space of prevention and trying to make sure that we're, helping our community understand their responsibility in this space. And, like you asked, share some of the stories, year over year. I mean, we're just completing our 5th year of operations. Consistently, year after year, 70% of the people that we serve are girls age 6 to 12, and consistently 65 to 70% of them have experienced sexual abuse. There's some things to think about within those numbers, and one of them is that, even within that, only about 3% of sexual abuse cases are ever disclosed or reported.
Wow.
So those numbers are not even reflective of the real issues. We also know that boys are far less likely to disclose than girls. So does it mean 70% more girls are being harmed? Not necessarily. But we also need to create the opportunity for all of our children and youth to, feel safe enough to tell their truth when they feel the courage to do so. And that's part of our work, is trying to create a community who's ready to listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that I'm glad that you highlight that, because that approach is so necessary. Mm-hmm. It is just one of those topics that feels, it's not taboo, but it feels taboo. Like, even when I was drafting the questions to ask you, I was like, oh, can I ask that? Mm-hmm. Right. And I know you're such a good guardian and steward of the safety of those kiddos. You're the best person to talk about it. So if you can help teach us as a community mm-hmm. how to have these conversations, I mean, good on you. Like, it's so necessary, and it's disheartening mm-hmm. because it is so behind the curtain. Can you, okay, first of all, like, what age groups are we talking? What age group are you talking about? Like, what do you serve?
Great question. So we technically, now we are not a government funded agency. So we do everything through fundraising, grant writing, that sort of thing. So that's complicated mm-hmm. And not ideal, but what it does provide us is the opportunity to build and maintain our own mandate.
Right.
So technically our mandate is that we serve children and youth under 19 who've experienced some form of abuse. That is our very specific lane. Because bearing in mind that our job is sort of twofold. We coordinate the investigations of child abuse through our partnerships, and then we provide all the wraparound services for children who have disclosed that abuse. It was funny, I actually forgot what the question was because I just started talking, but
that's okay.
I'm like, what were we talking about?
Well, it's just about? Like the age, because I think
I
think that's one of the constraints that the ministry has to work within, because like children are technically age 18, they're out of the system, right? Yeah. So I think the point that you were sort of getting at is that because you're not publicly funded,
that age mandate is really up to us.
Your own rules.
So we, it's 19 and under. Essentially the way that it works, to this point, the youngest child we've ever served was around 5 weeks old. We have actually served youth a little older than 19 who cognitively presented in a younger demographic. So we really work in partnership with the Ministry of Children and Family and police to determine if we are the best place for that child to be served. And so we always call the age mandate a bit of a gray brush stroke because we want to be there to help. And sometimes there's youth who fall under that age group and it is not the best place for them to be served. And that's not common, but we have to keep the safety of the other kids in the space in mind. So if you have a really violent youth, it might not be the best place to bring them. But generally speaking, that's always a collaborative conversation to figure out how can we serve and how do we work with someone. But and then the way it works with policing is in Kelowna, we have 4 vulnerable sector policing units and we work with all of them. But the child abuse unit is fully embedded at the center. So that unit stops and starts their day with us, and they do all of the interviewing and work around cases for abuse 10 and under. And then we work very closely with sex crimes and intimate partner violence and the ICE unit on the other files. So depending on the definition of abuse that's entering the space, basically dictates how we're working with police.
So I'm going to ask you about that too, because again, I think our audience is curious about, at least I know I am, what constitutes, so you sort of have neglect and abuse. What constitutes like neglect, for example?
Yeah, those are difficult questions to answer because it's so situationally specific. But, ultimately, so one of the big things to understand about our work too is that we don't supersede the mandate of police and ministry. So if you suspect abuse or suspect someone in your life is being harmed in this way, you have a legal responsibility to report that to the Ministry of Children and Families or to the police. So it's really for them to determine what threshold that meets.
Okay.
And they're bringing that to us.
Right.
So, and they're the experts in those spaces to identify those. But I think, and it's not really the question you asked, but I think the important thing for people to understand about child abuse is, we've come from a historical place of, we don't always question what happens behind other people's closed doors and it's not our business. Yeah. And I think people have often led from a space of what if I'm wrong and being afraid to ring a bell they can't unring. I would always have them ask the question, what if you're right? And to understand those mechanisms, because it's not your job to decide if it meets any sort of threshold. It's not your job to think, that looks 100% I'm certain that child's being neglected, or I'm
Right.
100% certain
Oh,
that's
it
happened,
ticks this
or I didn't see it, so I'm
list.
not sure, so I'm not going to do anything. You really do have to follow your gut and allow for the authorities who are experts in that space to do those investigations and to do their work to keep kids safe. Because that's, to me, always the biggest thing, is people getting caught up in the definition or the threshold, when it's really more of a, if you think something is going on, then do the right thing by allowing the professionals to figure out, is
whether
that
that's
thing
the
going
case
on or not.
Yeah.
And that's really what I would hope people, if they visit our website, there's a lot of, we have courses on there that are like recognizing the signs of abuse, what to do in your duty to report or your responsibility to report. Being informed about that is the best way to be a safe community member, of understanding. You don't have to know. You don't have to be certain. That's not the point. You have to follow your gut and make sure you do the right thing if you think a child is in a vulnerable situation.
I love that. I love that advice. And I think that's super helpful, and kind of lets us off the hook a little bit to be sort of in a position to, judge, right? Yeah. It's like, if your intuition is telling you that something is wrong, report it. And then allow the individuals, the professionals, as you said, who know how to assess these situations, to do their thing.
100%.
Yeah. I thank you for sharing that. So as you said, like, if there's someone listening right now that suspects that that they know of a situation where a child is being abused or neglected, the process is to call law enforcement
or Ministry of Child and Families.
Okay.
In some cases do both.
Right.
If you're really worried, make both calls. Those agencies end up working together either way. But being able to make that call is important. And the other thing, wherever possible, make sure they know who you are. Like, you can make those calls anonymously, but it does slow the process down.
Right. Yeah.
But there's lots of reasons why a person would make that decision. But if you can, being part of that solution really helps as well.
Amazing. So as we sort of already touched on, I had the opportunity to tour the space. And are you able to share a little bit about how that space helps to make children and families feel safe? I don't know if you can articulate it, because it was really great, because I got to see it in real life, and it is quite remarkable. But knowing that these kiddos are probably going through the most destabilizing experience that one can imagine. How have you designed that space to make it feel safe for children of kind of all ages, ethnicities, stages of life? It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say it's an ongoing answer.
Yeah.
Every day we're striving to be more inclusive and make sure the space feels safe for everyone. Again, child abuse does not discriminate. So trying to figure out perpetually, how do we continue to do that? A great example right now is we've recently formed our youth advisory committee. And we're really leaning into that group to help us understand, are we meeting the needs of youth? And they just walked through our space the other day and had some amazing and brilliant suggestions on just small things that we can do, and we'll action every one of them that we can. But that's ongoing work. I'd say in the very beginning, we had the benefit of hindsight, during the capital phase, of visiting other centers and really taking a look at what was working in certain spaces and not in other spaces, and really working to be purposeful in that. And one of the things we were thinking about at the time was, how to build a space that would feel as comfortable and safe for a 4-year-old as it would for a 13-year-old.
Exactly.
And trying to build the balance between those things. But then also, how do you build a space for people putting their hand up to work in the most complex content and not have it feel like working in a daycare, but have it feel like working in a really healthy, vibrant environment that is conducive to also maintaining their mental health and wellness in the space. So a lot of really just sort of purposeful design, every square inch of that space was very on purpose. But we've also made a lot of changes since it's opened, where we realized, actually we got that wrong. Let's revisit that and do it differently. But it's really intentional. It's purposeful. And I would say we do a lot of it through partnership. We work, this last year we've just completed working on an almost 8-month-long cultural inclusivity audit to really go through everything from the space and program delivery, but also into the most basic foundational documentation. Are we being inclusive, and are we safe, and are we creating a trauma-informed, culturally safe space. So I would say, I don't think there's a we are this now moment in that. I think we are always pursuing that.
It's just iterating.
Yeah. And I think that's the key, is knowing that there's not really a finish line in the space of being safe, trauma-informed, culturally inclusive, and all those things. It's really about being on purpose and asking the questions all the time and then listening to the answers. It's not enough to ask the question if you're not going to listen and then action something out of it.
Absolutely. Are you able to share about the room that you've designed? And I think it's kind of like an innovative, it's an innovation in terms of how, there's a room at the CYAC where kids are able to provide testimony.
Yeah.
It is like that for me was like a wow moment. Yeah. Can you share? I'm not going to even go any further. I would like you, if you can, share about that.
That's a great example of, our community is really the reason this center exists. And without the space, this would never have been achieved. And this is really monumental evidence of system change. And, I actually distinctly remember about 7 years ago having the conversation about, could we bring remote testimony for children to life in this community, and being told that will probably never happen. It's not happening in BC. It's not the way we do things. And
so that is, just for clarification, children being able to testify offsite
from the courthouse.
And
to me, I think one of the things that I believe has helped me be somewhat successful in my role is not coming from the systems,
right?
And literally looking at it and saying, but that's silly. Like, why wouldn't we do that? And really not buying into the limitations that the system has set for itself. And so we actively pursued this outcome for a very long time. And then for us, what actually happened is, I always have to acknowledge, I think we have to give COVID a little bit of credit for this.
Yep.
If COVID taught us anything, it's that we actually can change if forced to do so. It just change isn't easy, so we often avoid it.
Or you feel like it takes too long. There's too much red tape.
But COVID forced all kinds of system change. And for us, one of the things that happened is bail hearings and stuff started to be done remotely, which saved a lot of money and time. And all of a sudden the system was like, oh, actually, that's pretty smart. Maybe we won't switch that back, right? So that was sort of part of that journey. But for us, what actually happened is we had a call from another province that asked us if we could facilitate remote testimony for a little girl that was living here in Kelowna, who would not, for safety reasons, return to the other province to provide that testimony. And without the opportunity to remotely testify, that case would be closed. And so we just said yes, because we didn't have to ask anyone's permission, because it was interprovincial. And we created this kind of ad hoc space. And this little warrior testified from our center for 2 days. And then in this particular situation, the caregiver attached had similar experience much earlier in their own life, and was able to really see the difference and speak to it. And
with the same offender?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so with their permission, we were able to create a bit of a case study out of that experience. And we sent it to the BC Crown office, which for us really triggered and catalyzed a next step. So that little one, I hope they know that they catalyze change for kids forever, because now there's 4 centers in the province facilitating remote testimony like ours.
Were you the first?
We were among the first. There was they green lighted the process at that time for everyone who met the requirements. So there was a few of us who were able to start down this path, and it took us about a year after that moment to fundraise and put the room together and things like that. But it's been operational now. It'll be 2 years in January since we launched that space, and it's transformational. Putting, in most courthouses, really vulnerable victims have the opportunity to ask to testify from a separate room from the accused. But in a community of our size, the likelihood that you will see that person in the parking lot or in the hallway or in the bathroom is extremely high. And particularly when it comes to children, they haven't seen that person maybe in 6, 12, 24 months. It's a really intimidating moment, and it can fundamentally change their ability to find their truth that day. And it changes everything. And if nothing else, we want to give victims the opportunity to say their words safely. So now, because most of these kiddos are in our services and care anyway, they come back to a place that they already know is safe, surrounded by a team they know is safe, with zero risk of running into that person and being able to say their words remotely to the courtroom from our space. And it's very transformational piece of the work for sure.
And it was certainly like that at that moment for me. I was like, the work that you're doing is transformational.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you've mentioned it. The funding for CYAC is all private donors and grants.
Yes.
I know every time I talk to you, and certainly even this last time touring the space, I'm always like, what can I do? Like, I want to get, I'm sure you have this happen all the time because your mission is so clear and you articulate it so well. And we all, I mean, as mothers, and just humans, there's this like desire to help children. So I'm always like, what can I do? So what, like if people are listening to this right now and they're like, what can I do to help, to support? What can I do?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. Obviously, we're a fundraising agency like many, so we are always need that support. And, I think one of the things I always want to say to community, we come from such a generous community. Like if I have learned anything over 6 years, it's real deep humility for the generosity of our community. But I think it's important for people to know that you can make a difference at every level. And I feel like sometimes the everyday donor can be lost or maybe intimidated by or feel less than the checks they see, on the internet, 10,000. Yeah. When you give up a cup of coffee to make a $5 donation, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
No matter where you choose to give that. I think like for me, that's the big thing is, and I'll say this anytime anyone asks me, like the infrastructure of the not-for-profit community and the work that we do to hold up the vulnerable cannot be done by any one agency. It is a intersection and symbiotic group. Like we work with other not-for-profits every single day. EFRI, the Women's Shelter, Bridge, BGC, like all of them interconnect to our families. So wherever you choose, like whatever it is for you, I think that's such an important thing to know is that we can all make a difference at whatever level that we need to. For us, the other ways though that you can make impact, the first one for me is always just go to our website, read about the work, take the courses. Like if that's the thing that you can do is become a safer member of community, do that. Like that is such an important piece of understanding. There's a 12-minute course on there on recognizing the signs of human trafficking. I want everybody in our community to take that course. If every single person would take it, we would have a really strong and informed community because trafficking can't be solved through victims. Victims often don't know they're victims. They don't identify as victims. We have to create a community that is intolerant to this crime.
What? Okay.
And that is
huge. Can you deconstruct that for me? Because like I literally think of like people stealing kids and taking them to other places and selling them.
Yeah. That's essentially what trafficking fundamentally comes down to. And I think in our community, one of the things that we know is that we are part of an understood ring of human trafficking. It's the sex trafficking of children. There's lots of forms of trafficking, but the one that we play a role in is in the sex trafficking of children. These are most often Canadian children being trafficked across the country. And the frustrating thing around human trafficking is how hard it is to get to the root of it. If a police officer pulls over someone who has a gun on the seat, they can put them in jail.
Right.
If they pull over someone who has drugs on the seat, they can do the same thing. Too much money, you can even, you can ask questions about that. But if they have two 13-year-old girls in the back seat who say, he's my cousin, there's nothing they can do. And that's what I mean about it. We can't come at it only through the victim work. We really have to come at it through a community level,
right,
to really figure out, how do we recognize this? What do we do? And that's where, in the last couple of years, we've been working very closely with an organization called Not in My City in partnership with police and our city and the airport to start unpacking this conversation in our community. And it is impactful. But this is, again, grassroots reality is we need our whole community to understand what it looks like and at least to feel empowered to recognize the signs if they see them. Particularly in sectors like tourism, transportation, like that those kind of sectors, we really need those sectors to be really informed.
Yeah. Wow.
Super important.
Okay, so there's a course.
Yeah, there's actually a tab on our website called Not in My City that you can go to and see the course there, and take that. It takes like less than the time it takes you to drink your coffee. You can take the course, and I promise you will come out of it feeling more informed and go, okay, I get this now. I'm aware. Yeah.
Wow. Empowering people with solutions to be part of change.
100%.
I love that.
So I think, how do people impact that? That's a great way, is just being informed and being aware.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of tours of our center, of helping people kind of understand the magnitude of what child abuse looks like in our community. Like I think people will be surprised to learn how busy we are.
Mm-hmm.
We have,
it was so interesting when we were there that day, because you guys are so great. Like you've got this beautiful, and it is beautiful. It was like a total crap, Kelowna winter day. It was like dark and rainy and then you go in and it's like bright and but not too bright. Like it feels really warm, but you guys scurried us through, like, because you had people there, and at no point did we see anybody else.
Yeah.
But
we call it choreography.
Yeah.
We learned that from another center we visited early on, that it's almost like it's almost like choreography of the center. We know that if this person's moving, we're closing that door.
You had like a whole communication system.
That being said, we also try to normalize that kids aren't alone in this. So it's not a bad thing to run into someone else. What we don't want them to have to run into is large groups of adults.
Yes.
That can be really intimidating. But we do try to normalize kids seeing other kids in the space, because that is an important part of understanding that they're not alone. But in a community of our size, we have to be cautious about it. Mm-hmm. So we are cautious, but also try to make sure that that we don't attach stigma to it by making it feel isolated either.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to sort of switch gears a little bit. I've known you for some time.
A minute now.
Yeah, a minute. And you have a remarkable ability, as you said, sort of scratch the surface of like being able to do this like really, really difficult work that many of us just couldn't even imagine. And you are like, you have this ability, like you're very, I don't want to say like in a bad way, but you're assertive. Like you have a presence, but you're so kind. And what a lot of people don't know is you're like super funny. How like you really are. Ginny has spoken at a number of our donor events because we've the KGH Foundation is a partner with the CYAC, and we've been in relationship with you and your organization for a number of years. And so Ginny has spoken at a couple of our donor events, and everybody is just charmed. But how do you do that? Like, how do you? I think a lot of people wonder, like, how do you work in such a difficult situation? It's hard not, I mean, like, I make pretty pictures and write campaign slogans. Like, I don't take that home at night. How do you do this?
I would be lying if I didn't say I've sat in my car after work and cried, like we all do. It's heavy work. There's no question about it. But I mean, a couple things to that. I think, first of all, I don't have the hardest job in our center. There are people who have far harder jobs in terms of sitting in the space and listening to children talk about some of the most horrific things we can imagine. That's not my job. I'm connected to those files in different ways, but so my hat goes off to our frontline who works in this space. And if you put your hand up to work in those large agencies, it's because you have a fundamental passion for supporting really vulnerable kids. So we pay a lot of attention to how are they doing in our space, and a lot of our initiatives around keeping the team well. The longer they can be well in that work, the longer they can serve vulnerable children, and the more children benefit from their experience. And so it's a really important thing. And we know that CYACs do reduce the turnover on the front line of child abuse by creating that supportive environment. So I would say that first is, there's harder jobs than mine. I think too, though, that I come to work every day knowing that we're making a difference for the kids that walk through the door that day, but also in the big picture of things, that we are changing systems. And there is a lot of system change to be done, years of system change, but we're always in pursuit of the next thing that we can do better. So for me, that's the thing that fuels me getting out of bed and walking into space every day is, if we stop asking the question, how do we get better, then it doesn't get better. And I know that space is fundamentally a safe space for kids that are coming there. So for me, that's a piece of it.
And it's part of it. It's part, like you said, it's like part of the solution, like not focusing so much on the problem, but like the fact that there's an opportunity to change the trajectory of these children's lives.
Yeah, 100%. And, and one thing I love about my job is talking about my job. And that goes back to that thing about elementary school and talking too much. But I am always really happy to engage with community and supporters and partners to talk about why this matters. And, so for me, that's a really fulfilling part of the role, is when other people connect to it, feeling like we're advancing the mission a little bit, when one new person walks through the space and goes like, wow, who knew? We have never had someone walk through a tour in our space and at the end of it go, yeah, I don't care. Ever.
Totally.
Every single person who's ever walked into the CYAC leaves, I think, a little bit changed and a little bit understanding, okay, there's something I can do in this space and we can make a difference. So that really fuels me, I would say, too.
I love it.
Yeah.
You're really, really, really good at it. If there's someone listening that is, you found your thing, like you're on a mission, you found your thing, and you have figured out a way to embrace. Sometimes I love my producer, Jason, and so, like right now he's telling me I have only 10 minutes left. I know,
no, just
right?
Says who?
Yes, but okay, thanks.
It's because I talk too much. I said
no,
that at the
it's so
beginning.
good though. It's so good. But I'm just like, I'm curious how you would like. I just know that sometimes we do our jobs and we see things that we're like, oh. Like if only we just did this different, like we could change things, right? Or, what advice would you give to somebody listening who really wants to make a difference but has no idea where to start?
I think what I have learned about creating change is that you always have to have the end goal in mind, but you have to recognize that it's like a chessboard. Stalemate doesn't ever happen at the beginning.
Yeah.
There's a million moving parts.
Like workaround.
And they're also never by accident. You have to be purposeful. You have to always be looking at that board and figuring out what is the next move and what are they going to do and how do I anticipate that? I use the reference all the time because for me, I really feel like the work that we're doing is this constant, very strategic, moving each piece at the right time. And it's like, it's moving mountains, but like one pebble at a time. And all of a sudden you move enough pebbles and all of a sudden you start to see, oh, over here, we're creating a new thing. It's working.
Kind of
that's
a hill
still
now.
there. Like that's still a big deal, but we're making change. And so I think, I guess the advice is just to not feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of the big thing, but to start like break it down into the little bits that can be chipped away at. And then I could give you 10 examples if we had more than 10 minutes, Jason, about,
we're going to
places where
break the law now.
People told me it wasn't possible. And in my mind, I'm like, well, hold my beer because we're going to change it. And it might take 5 years. It might take 5 minutes, but one little tiny thing at a time, we can do it. And that, like our clinic, great example. In the beginning, the thinking was, well, why would we build this clinic for 9 kids? And my answer was, it's not 9 kids, but we're not going to learn how many kids it is unless we take the next step and let's figure it out together. And that partnership piece has worked to evolve those things. But it's been that like understanding of little tiny things can lead to really big shifts if you just stay the course.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. You have really become an inspiration. And I really am so grateful for the recognition that you have received. And you've received it. Here's the thing, Jason's laughing at me. Like women in leadership roles kind of have this opportunity to like embrace the fact that they're in a leadership position. And also, sometimes I think the tendency is to be humble about it. And I'm not saying that you're not humble, but I feel like you've embraced the recognition that you've been given and have stepped up to represent women in leadership roles and making a difference in communities and being a voice for the potential for social change.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, for me, like nobody goes into this kind of work for the recognition. That's not what drives us. But I think, like even the Business Excellence Awards the other night, so grateful to be acknowledged in that space. And and grateful to organizations like Chambers in acknowledging not-for-profits as part of the contributing part of our communities and economy and all of that. It's all part of the story. But to me, the biggest thing is about that shared recognition. To me, we can't do anything in our space without our whole team. So it's really a collective effort. But I do think there's an opportunity as leaders, as women leaders, to really champion our ability to drive change and to rally around other leaders, not just women leaders, but all leaders who are driving that change and create that kind of strength together. And so, yeah, I mean, it's never driven by a need for recognition, but the recognition does help to bring our community's eye to the issue. So it is a necessary part of the story. If we want people to acknowledge where things need to change, then we need to celebrate when they are, which is a weird circular thing, but necessary.
I really do agree with you. And I think that sometimes it's easy in the world that we live in right now, at least in North America, to be influenced. There's so much noise out there, right? And, we think about influencers, and I'm a real passionate advocate for, we need a new influencer, right? The ones that are on the ground, doing the work and not concerned about the recognition piece or how many followers you have, but genuinely leading a movement.
Yeah.
Right. And so hats off to you for stepping into that space, not because you want to, have 1 million followers, but because you want to have 1 million followers. Do you know what I mean?
1 million other people trying to drive change would be great.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Do you think that women bring something unique to a leadership perspective?
I think so. I mean, I've had some great leaders in my life. I've had some less great leaders in my life. But I think for me, it's an interesting thing when you look across the landscape of leadership. I guess for me, what it is about female leaders is just maybe that it's because we come at it a little bit differently. It's a hard thing to articulate, but I think for me at least, there's an authenticity about leadership that is so necessary. And maybe that's it, that from the, if you can walk in as a female leader and just authentically lead exactly the way you are, I'm exactly who I am in my space. My team knows who I am. They know that I'm a bit silly sometimes and I talk too much sometimes, and
you're a
I can
rock
be
star.
A bit of a control freak and those kinds of things. But it's really about being the best version of your authentic self. And I think maybe just women are really great at that, about just leading with their authentic selves, and that's the superpower, right?
Yeah.
If you can bring that piece into any space, people are more compelled to get behind authenticity, I think, than anything else.
Yeah. I also think there's a vulnerability piece that comes to that, and I don't want to say that men in leadership positions don't have the capacity for that or don't demonstrate that, but I certainly think it contributes to that authenticity. Is just listen, I'm doing it, I'm hot
trying to survive some teenagers,
right? I'm hot flashing, and I got a kid at home that won't get out of bed in the morning, because they like to sleep. Not trying to sort of just be one dimensional. I think that's part of the balance and that authenticity, and the opportunity there. And I just want to make it clear, I celebrate leadership, men, women, anybody that
100%.
wants to step up and put themselves into that position where they have to make hard choices and take risks, and
it's not for the faint of heart.
be responsible for people too. It isn't for the faint of heart. So but the more I really think the more we can inspire others to really believe that they can make a difference, whether it's in a leadership role or whether it's something else.
I agree with that. And I also think it's so important to really hats off to all of the leaders in our not-for-profit sector, because I don't know if people always understand how complex those leadership roles are. Not-for-profit, you're always doing more with less. You're held under a really, really extraordinary level of scrutiny, and you're 9 things, right? In large organizations that would have a director of this, director of that, director of that.
Totally.
The leadership in these not-for-profits are 9 full-time people and doing their best to make sure that they can deliver for our community. So I am in constant awe of the not-for-profit sector of our community and the leaders that live within that space.
And thank you for saying that, because I think we feel that at the KGH Foundation. We often hear, well, you're so big, but we're not, and like we're still doing more with less every single day.
Yeah.
And really, really bright, committed people. But literally, like we always talk about it, the people that work in not-for-profit, if you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, it's going to be a short ride.
Yeah. You have to be so passionate about what you do and what you serve, for sure.
Yeah. Because it's a grind, but it's the most rewarding grind you'll ever do. So there's my pitch for being involved in
recruitment pitch.
Yes, totally. Okay. I'm going to switch gears really quickly. So I'm going to circle back to that question.
Yeah.
How has your definition of health and maybe what healthcare changed over the years?
That's a great one, because I think for me, before I made that big switch, before I was driving down Burns Road and decided to change my whole professional trajectory,
before you hit the speed bump,
before I hit that speed bump, healthcare to me was sort of very one-dimensional. I was in a really horrific car accident when I was a teenager. I broke my neck and spent a lot of time recovering from that. So to me, healthcare was hospitals, surgery. Acute it was very care. One-dimensional to me. I think what's changed for me in working in this sector and being there is understanding how integrated and interconnected mental health, healthcare, well-being, community are, that it's not this sort of one-dimensional, you need healthcare when you're sick. It's to be injured. Well, and for our community to be well, we have to look at all of the moving parts of wellness and figure out who supports that wellness. And I mean, our entire organization is built on the premise that we do better together than apart. We have formally partnered with 6 agencies, and we partner with every other not-for-profit in the community on a daily basis. And that kind of comes back to that idea of our community wouldn't stand up without all of them. So that's to me what healthcare is now, is more the sort of fabric of wellness that sort of transcends the whole community, and which piece of it matters to any one person at any moment depends on what's happening in their life. Mm-hmm. And what pieces of that healthcare and wellness system they're triggering depends on what's happening in their life at any given time.
And that leads me to a question that was on my list of questions earlier, but I didn't get to it, but I feel like it fits here. What do you, in your experience, in your opinion, what do children need to thrive?
Oh, so much. I mean, children are extraordinary, resilient. That's something I've witnessed in the most profound ways where we are. But in the end, children need safety, security. They need play, and they need the ability to be unburdened, to grow and thrive. And I think as a community, to make sure all children have that, we really have to work together, because not every child grows up in a circumstance where that is readily available. And that's where we have a responsibility to pay attention and make sure that we can try to make sure as many children as possible have that opportunity to be well and thrive.
I love that. Okay. One more question? Yeah. So, of course, we feel like we're very clever in naming this podcast Wealthy. Yes, because it's like basically a play on the word healthy.
Yeah.
And wealthy in the fact that when your health is wealth, basically. And as you've just so beautifully articulated, it's very nuanced and multidimensional. Mm-hmm. What areas of your life do you feel wealthy?
Oh, I feel very, very blessed as a whole in my life, but certainly in my work I have a very fulfilling role in the things that I do. And also just, I think in my community connection, I'm not good at being alone. I don't like alone. I love to be surrounded by vibrant community and people, and I'm wealthy in my home life. I have 2 really amazing kids, I don't know. I think for me, I'm pretty proud to have been able to work in a space where I give back, and that gives me that sense of wealth. And I just hope, if anything, for me to feel that sort of full circle wealthy is making sure I'm bringing that back and helping to inspire others to think the same way. And, that would be sort of the full circle moment for me. But yeah, I'm pretty fortunate, to be able to do the things that I get to do and be surrounded by the people I am. So yeah,
pretty holistically wealthy, Shauna.
Well, that seems like a fantastic way to wrap this up.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in, and truly thank you for the work that you're doing at CYAC, and thank you for the work that you're doing in our community to really demonstrate that social change is possible, and that the strength of our leaders is really what is going to drive us forward as a community. And then bringing everyone else along is so important. So
I agree.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Anytime.